Welcome everybody. My name is Benji Cohn here with the Minnesota Outdoor Skills and Stewardship Series. I'm excited to welcome my colleague May Vang. She's our community outreach coordinator, and she's going to talk a little bit about learning to hunt in the new world. So, May, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. 안녕하세요, everyone. That actually means hello, everyone, in Hmong. And I'd like to just thank you for being here today for today's episode. Again, like Benji said, my name is May Vang, and I work for the DNR, and I work with the Fish and Wildlife Division as the Community Outreach Coordinator. So what that means is that a big part of my role is to connect with communities around hunting and fishing, conservation, and other outdoor skills, and specifically with the Hmong community and the Southeast Asian community, which I'm really proud to be a part of. So I'm excited to be here to share a little bit more about the Hmong people and who we are, and also to just share a little bit about our hunting traditions, both back in our homeland, but also what the traditions look like now and how those are practiced, what they are, how those have adapted and been carried on here to the US. And then I do want to just talk a little bit more about like what my role is as well in general, and then we'll save a little bit of time for a reflection at the end. But like many of you all that are probably joining us here today on today's webinar, you might be either a hunter or just a lover of the outdoors. But either way, for our community, for most communities, hunting isn't just really, it's not all about just the, harvesting an animal. So for our community, it's really about being in community. It's about being with family. Sometimes it's about cute hunting dogs and puppies, as I learned from Pheasant Fest this past weekend. But sometimes it's really just about, for some people, it's about just being connected to the outdoors. And so I'm excited to just kind of share a little bit more about this. So just want to make sure that I get my slide going here. So I actually do want to start off by inviting you all to think about your very own hunting experience. And again, if you are either a new hunter or you don't hunt, but you're just interested in this, think about like an outdoor skills that you really enjoy. And I'd like to you to ask yourself a couple questions. And so I'd like you to take a little bit of time to reflect on, why do you hunt or why do you enjoy this outdoor activity? And then I want you to think about when and how did you learn the skill? Who do you go and do this activity with? And what is it about this experience that you enjoy the most? And then lastly, I want you to think about, do you share this experience or do you want to share this experience with someone? And why do you want to share that experience with someone? So in doing my work and just talking to community members and talking to doing this outreach effort, I've heard from a lot of hunters and a lot of people that enjoy the outdoors that, especially if you hunt, that, sometimes it is about the cute puppies and the dogs that's the big piece that they really enjoy about hunting. Sometimes it's about really just, it's a tradition, right? So you do it with your family, maybe through multiple generations. And then sometimes it's about the idea of bringing food and putting food on the table for your family and friends in your community. For some people, it might actually just be the solitude in the woods. And some people, hunters, often talk about how they just enjoy like being out there before the break of dawn or at dusk, and they're listening and watching as the world around them wakes up. So as you reflect on those questions, all of the things that you reflected on, as well as some of these things that I mentioned, this is really telling that, hunting and the outdoors is really about that connection to the outdoors and to hunting traditions and the outdoors, but also just even to your own community, whether that is your family or a broader community or even like the hunting community, right? So it's truly about that deep connection that you have. And that is really truly the essence and essence of the heritage of hunting. So I actually want you to think about those things. and keep all of those things that you reflected on in mind as I go through today's presentation. And I will actually start off with a brief history of the origin of the Hmong people. And then I'll talk about some of our hunting traditions back in our homeland. Again, what that means, what that looks like, and how it was practiced. And then I also do want to share a little bit about how those hunting traditions have really adapted and how we've carried those traditions on, much through like many of your own probably hunting traditions. And then we'll talk a little bit about, again, my current role, what we're doing here at the DNR, and then just some future engagement opportunities that we have. And then we'll end with a little reflection and some Q&A. So for those of you who might not be quite as familiar with the Hmong community, the Hmong people, we are actually a small little ethnic group from originally from southern China. And due over years and years, due to political conflict, we migrated down into Southeast Asia. So particularly Laos, Vietnam, and Thailand. And in these places, Hmong people actually lived in remote mountainous villages. So what that meant is that we really had to be self-sufficient. And what that also means is that a really big part of our daily lives is actually hunting and fishing and agriculture. And so we really, really had to rely on the land and the forest and the jungle, the rivers, all of that to sustain our lives and for survival, essentially. So during the Vietnam War, many Hmong men and women were recruited to help the US CIA in what became known as the Secret War. And a lot of these Hmong men and women were actually as young as about like 12 years old. So that's pretty young. So if you can imagine young Hmong boys who were recruited to help US soldiers, and sometimes it's to help assist them, but sometimes it's even to help them pull out of war zones. And then Hmong women, again, as young as 12 years old, they were recruited to actually become nurses and to provide medical aid. And after the U.S. withdrew, unfortunately, the Hmong people, a lot of the Hmong families and Hmong people faced persecution, imprisonment, and violence, and so that caused them to flee to Thailand into refugee camps. And that is a very similar story. That if you talk to a lot of like Hmong community members, is that a lot of their parents or grandparents actually ended up in like a refugee camp, much like like my own family as well. And then once they were in the refugee camps in Thailand for a while, then we eventually made our way and settled in the US in the late 1970s. And I do want to just point out that these are the two photos. So on the left-hand side, this is Chua Tao. She's actually one of the first Hmong nurses, and I believe she actually just passed away recently here. But she was played a really big cultural and just a historical person, like in many Hmong women's lives, and a lot of the nurses really looked up to her. And then on the right-hand side, you can see some of the Hmong men who are soldiers. So Hmong hunters are really skilled and resourceful, and that meant that, it doesn't matter what condition they found themselves, they were able to harvest game, and they had those skills to track down wildlife, and had the skills to be able to hunt for them and harvest them. And historically, hunting was actually a means of providing food for families, but another really big piece for hunting is really to protect our crops. You can see on the right-hand side, there's a photo of a young woman who is making her way to the farmland. And this is, again, it's vast mountainous villages, right? And so, you can see that it's pretty steep hills here. But, Hmong people, we actually practice something in our homeland called a farming technique called slash and burn. And that is literally slash and burn. So it's like clear cutting and then burning it to add nutrients back into the soil. Pretty much very similar to how we do prescribed burns here in the US. And because we practiced this technique, the slash and burn technique, that meant that we actually had to make sure that these our farmland was a little ways from the villages, so that to protect the safety of the village and our homes, right? And so growing up, my mom always talked about how they, even as a young girl, but even throughout her adult life, how they had to walk for kilometers just to make sure that they to walk and to reach their farmland. But that meant that because it was such a far distance away, that sometimes little shelters were actually built so that they can actually spend the night there, or a night or two if they needed to. So again, traditionally, hunting is one way to protect these crops. So that meant that some of the hunters did have to walk a ways. So it could be like a multiple day hunting experience for them, right? But traditionally, it was usually the men in the family and the boys. So as soon as you were old enough to hunt safely, you were actually the ones that would be providing the wild game as a food source for the family. And then if you, most of the women and girls, they would actually spend most of the time either farming, or they would be the ones that would be tending to the home and to the children. Not to say that it was strictly just like Hmong men, you know, because there are stories, and in fact, in one of the, I'll reference this a little bit later, but one of our Minnesota conservation volunteer articles, there was a young woman that wrote a story about how she was able to hunt and maybe not join like the actual hunt, but you know, she was able to hunt with like a slingshot with her brother and things like that. So just wanted to make a note that it's not just completely like girls are allowed, but traditionally it was mainly men and the boys. And because agriculture is such a really big piece of our daily lives, that meant that hunting had to be strategic, right? So during harvesting season, you know, hunting might be a little bit, there's less time to hunt. So hunters would either wait a little bit until the harvesting season is a little bit low, or they would wake up at the, you know, hunt at the break of dawn and dusk, and then making sure that they have time to return home to help with other responsibilities around the home. So for the Hmong people, hunting is viewed as a communal activity, whether that's with your community or whether that's with your family. And it's really, all these traditions are really passed down through generations. And so that meant that at one hunting event, it is very, very common for you to see multi-generational. So multi-generations be at one hunting event together. And similar to most communities, you know, when you're prepping for like a hunting trip, it involves a lot of the similar things that maybe you all do when you're hunting or prepping for your hunting trip. So it involves, you know, maybe discussing like your strategies, prepping equipment and material. It's, you know, involves like selecting your hunting grounds, you know, placing like who is going to hunt where, right? And then it's, but because we're such a community-based ethnic group, that meant that everything from prepping to harvesting to even like the actual hunt itself, and even to once the something is harvested, like even that meal at the end, you know, that is all shared, and that's all like a community-based event. And so I like to share the examples of my own personal family. So I did grow up in a hunting family. It was mainly my brother and my dad and my uncles and the first and second and third cousins, right? And the grandparents that went and hunted. So again, it's multi-generational. I didn't go so much until last year was the very first time that I did go deer hunting. And I do kind of feel like, oh, what have I been missing out on, right? But it was usually my brother and my dad. And again, they would have deer camp. And what that meant is, again, you know, I would sit around and I hear and I see all this prepping that they would do. And again, it's all of the cousins and all of the grandparents and the uncles and everybody who would come and prep. And everybody preps a little bit. Everybody, you know, brings a little bit to deer camp. And then when you actually do go out and you actually harvest or tag a deer, you know, it's not like I tag a deer, I'm going to take this food home and process it. And then it's going to all go into my fridge, right? So when you like tag a deer, you're actually sharing all of that piece. And oftentimes it's like if there's five people there, you're splitting it between five people. So five families essentially. The next deer that gets tagged, that's also shared as well. And then Oftentimes, it also is a shared meal. So whatever has been harvested and tagged, right, and reported and stuff like that. Once that's all done and processed, then a lot of the times there's a shared meal, and everybody at camp is sharing this meal together. And if you do ever get to go hunt with some Hmong hunters, you will be for sure and be ready. You would be definitely invited to a warm shared meal with them as well. So as far as traditional hunting tools go, so usually they're handmade. On the left-hand side, you can see a crossbow that's handmade. And then other handmade tools included things like slingshots or snares or other traps. And usually all of these things are made out of either bamboo or any available natural material and fiber that's around. And then after the World War II, that was when more of the modern weapons and hunting tools were available. So on the top right hand side, you can see this is also handmade, but this is like a handmade musket gunpowder pounder. So that is handmade, but that is actually made to hold the gunpowder for the lower bottom right hand tool, which is a large musket rifle. And these are tools that were from the 1940s and 1960s. And these are actually tools that you can actually see in real life. So I took these photos from the Hmong Cultural Center Museum. It's right in St. Paul, and I would highly, highly recommend if you are interested in learning about more about the Hmong culture, the Hmong people, and even just to see these tools, I would highly recommend giving them a call and setting up a time to go and visit them. Their staff are really, really knowledgeable, but they also just have this really expansive um, like library of full of lots of information and great photos that you can and artifacts that you can see. And I do have the link here at the bottom, and then Cassie will also drop that in the chat for you if you're interested as well. And in Laos and Thailand, with just a vast mountainous forest and jungle and range, there's just a variety of animals that the Hmong hunters actually hunted for. Much of it is very similar to here in the US, but obviously different species. So some of these animals include like squirrels, bear and birds, wild deer or wild boar, right? So very much similar to here, just different species. And although traditionally wild game was considered a food source, it is also really important to note that some of these animals have an animate or like a spiritual connection to the Hmong people. So just one example is that some believe that if you cross like a certain animal across a path, that could essentially mean either good or bad luck. And then because it is such an important like spiritual connection to us, if like wild harvest game is harvested, some of that is actually offered to our ancestors. And so that could mean a couple different things. That could mean that maybe you harvest the animal and you cook a meal and you offer it to our ancestors, one, to thank them for like a safe hunting trip. But, most of the time when there's a cooked meal, sometimes that meal is offered to our ancestors to thank them, even for just the wild game, and to thank them. And usually that's offered before you even consume the animal itself. And then another really important connection that we have to wildlife is that we are pretty resourceful, as I said, as Hmong hunters, and that just Hmong people in general. So we do tend to use most of the wild game, most of the animal parts, and for even for some of the wild game parts, it's actually considered medicinal. And so those things are really important. So one example of a wild game part that would be considered medicinal is like a bear gallbladder, for example. So some people actually believe that the gallbladder is really good for curing fevers. And so a lot of really important cultural and traditions just to note and to learn a little bit about. So again, in the 1970s, the late 1970s, right? So the new refugees, like new Hmong immigrants, we arrived here in Minnesota and here in the US. And arriving in a new country meant, new languages, new food, right? New terrain, new neighborhoods, basically new everything. And so we really had to adjust to this new way of life. But the Hmong people were pretty resilient people. And so we found a way to um, really connect to something that's familiar that felt like home to us. And that is hunting and fishing and agriculture. So there are a lot of Hmong community members that still that found a way to hunt in this new land, found a way to fish in this new land, and even found a way to plant some of the same familiar food that we did back home here on U.S. soil, right? Um, and that those three things were really truly like a direct connection for us to our homeland in a brand new country. In fact, so I want to show these two pictures because, in fact, some of the regions in Minnesota reminded many Hmong people of home. So when we first arrived here, those just like the meandering rivers and the bluffs of the driftless areas in southern Minnesota, that really truly reminded us of home. So on the left-hand side, you can see a photo of Laos. Here's that mountainous range, right? So lush green rainforest here, and then you can see the meandering river below. And then on the right-hand side, that's a picture from Whitewater State Park. And again, you see these bluffs, these hills, right? And then you also see the meandering stream as well. And I do want to make a note that having worked with many communities before, that this isn't just a resemblance for the Hmong community, but there's a lot of resemblance here, and this is kind of a thought process for a lot of immigrants is that when you first arrive to a new country, you're kind of seeking. It's very different, but you're seeking some familiarity. So I've talked to especially like some younger kids who have just arrived here, and if they're in the middle of prairie, like I've had students talk to me about how maybe like an open prairie here actually reminds them of like a savanna from back home in Africa. And so again, this is just a very commonality thing where for immigrants, for us, is to look for some place or some things that are familiar to us in a brand new country. But arriving here in the US, right, for hunters, even though these rolling hills of the driftless areas felt familiar, there were really lots of new challenges that we had to navigate through. So, one thing is language, language as a barrier, because not being able to speak the language meant a lot of barriers. It meant not understanding a lot of the things, right? Another thing is access to land. So knowledge of where to access land and where to hunt is very different from our home country. So in Laos, you could pretty much hunt anywhere and everywhere, given that it is safe. Um, Rules and regulations was a completely new concept for Hmong hunters, and so again, in Laos and Thailand and Vietnam, there was no such thing at that time, such as, different hunting zones. There wasn't anything such as, different hunting seasons, let it alone like non-game versus game species. So that was all completely a new concept for us. And then also, unfortunately, because being new to the country, it meant that not every community is familiar with you. And so that unfortunately did cause a lot of safety concerns as well. And I do want to point out that article that I keep talking about is there's a picture of it on the right hand side here. So the article is called Hunting and Fishing in a New Land. And that's one of our Minnesota Conservation Volunteer articles. You can find that through on our website. And Cassie will drop that link in our chat. But it's the July and August issue, the 1995 issue. And that really does a great job of um, really capturing this experience for these new hunters. And then it also does a really great job of capturing the Southeast Asian outreach program that was developed during that time with the DNR. It talks a little bit about what the outreach effort looks like, who was involved, and what kind of experience that was like. So I would highly recommend reading this article if you have a chance to. And during this time around the late 1970s and 1980s, because of all of this new things, new concepts to the community. There were a lot of community organizations and a lot of community leaders that came together to form organizations and programs to specifically support new immigrants as they try to navigate to their new life in Minnesota, but also to help these new hunters and anglers as well. And you can see that the collaboration within these organizations, there were community leaders that were hired that specifically actually were able to speak these languages and have direct contact with these community organizations as well as these community leaders. And I just want to mention a few important names because, again, there's lots of history of people doing this work. And so I just want to make sure that credit is given to these folks who did an amazing job of filling this gap and doing this outreach effort. So outreach staff at the DNR, specifically Tong Vang and Josie Chong, and then Kao Tao, one of our naturalists as well. So they did a lot of this really early work, and that was a really big effort on our outreach effort here at the DNR. And on this page, you can see a photo of a community resource. So this is more of like a condensed resource to specifically talk about small game hunting and the rules and regulations. But this is actually a resource that I found from one of my dad's stash. So you can see that it actually is translated into both Hmong and the Thai language. And because that's actually pretty common, for the elders, that they could speak multiple languages. And so remember that a lot of these Hmong elders, they had the experience of living in Thailand, both like living there, but also fleeing to those refugee camps. So they spent a lot of time there, and a lot of them also knows that Thai language as well. Other outreach efforts included like learning to read maps so that hunters were aware again of these hunting zones, right? And these boundaries, and also just to be aware of where these public access were. So you can see, again, these are early photos from this outreach effort here at the DNR, but you can see here in these two photos that there are Hmong and Southeast Asian hunters here who are reviewing and looking over and getting familiar with these different boundaries and zones with these regional maps. There were also field trips to wildlife management areas. And so this was again, that southern part of Minnesota was a really popular area for hunters and anglers. But to kind of inform the community that there are like WMAs or wildlife management areas or public hunting areas like elsewhere in the state, there were these field trips out to these WMAs to kind of share and share this information with community members. And so I believe there were several buses. So sometimes it would be a bunch of community members that would be on multiple buses and just different field trips to a lot of these different public areas. And one thing is just even learning what a WMA is and what is allowed or not allowed at that place. That was also really great information that was shared during these field trips as well. And then again, referring back to that Minnesota Conservation Volunteer article. So these are two photos from there. You can see on the left-hand side, that there's a photo of a conservation officer sharing the hunting and trapping regulation book and sharing with some of these hunters, like where are some of these public boundaries or some of these public lands, and really going through it to help them understand that. And then on the right-hand side, again, a nod to these early outreach staff. So you can see that there's a staff here checking a deer tag with a conservation officer. And during this time, because of all of this effort that's going on, there were also, I do want to mention that at a more local level, there were a continuing effort in more community organizations that were being developed to help support a lot of the Hmong and the Southeast Asian communities. Firearm safety classes were also offered. And what's important to note here is that firearm safety classes were taught in the Hmong language for those that have that language barrier. But it was also there to, having Hmong firearm instructors and other Southeast Asian firearm instructors was really important because that helped build that welcoming space, but it also helped lessen that learning gap. And it also helped just with that trust building piece because the instructors were reflective of the community. So present day, what does the hunting landscape look like today? So last year, 2025 actually marked the 50th year anniversary of the first Hmong refugees here in the US. And today there are about a little bit over 95,000 Hmong residents that live here in Minnesota, which actually makes us the second largest population next to California. And hunting and fishing still continues to be a really big cultural tradition here, and it's still deeply rooted in our community. It has expanded. So hunting has expanded to multiple different species, including squirrel, deer, elk, and bear, wild boar, waterfowl, upland birds, and a lot of hunters are traveling all over the U.S. to hunt as well. Hmong women, again, have always been involved, maybe not quite as much as, in the beginning, but today, there are even more Hmong women and girls who are interested in the sport, and it's important to note that there's also both Hmong and women firearm instructors. On a more sort of like local level, we do have passionate individuals who are really passionate about just sharing their skills, either sharing their hunting skills and fishing skills, or just sharing conservation messages. And there's local clubs and groups who are out there who are mentoring younger folks or new people who want to continue this tradition. And then on a bigger scale, from local, there are Hmong influencers and public figures now who are really passionate about also sharing their wildlife engagement and their outdoor skills as well. And a lot of them are through either like sharing their hunting techniques, or again, conservation messages, or also things like wild game cooking. There is still more work to do, but there are professionals from the community that have forged their way into the natural resource field and conservation field as well. And slowly but surely, there is starting to be more representation in the conservation field that reflects the community. And whether that is conservation officers, outreach staff, or there are even folks getting involved in wildlife management on the research side as well. And what is the most exciting, at least for me, is that today there are a lot of young professionals and there's a lot of traction for more of these young professionals to get into this career force, especially now that more agencies and organizations are becoming more inclusive about their hiring process and their recruitment initiatives. But as much as this hunting heritage still runs really deeply within our community, I do want to acknowledge that we are losing some of these traditions because of there's other competing things like sports. So again, I put up Sydney Silly's photo because a lot of our younger folks are like dreaming to be our next Hmong gold medalists, right? And then both the young and old generations, they're venturing off into new business ventures or higher education opportunities, as well as getting involved in the arts. But the possibilities for our future engagement to help continue these traditions, it's really endless here. So I do want to mention that our outreach staff in the past have made these really significant strides to welcome and to engage Hmong and Southeast Asian hunters. But there still is really important work left to do. So we're really trying to continue to build on that foundation, and we're really excited to continue to build these meaningful relationships and connections within the community. Our outreach is going to remain focused on sustaining our outreach, our relationship building, our positive engagement, and really trying to make a long-term impact here. And so, as the Hmong Community Outreach Coordinator, my role is to really try to help facilitate this engagement and to serve as a bridge between the community and our agency and our partners, and to really elevate some community voices and to support ongoing engagement efforts going into the future. And then I do want to make some highlight some of our current work efforts here. So as you can see on the page, and I think Cassie just dropped the link in the chat, but we do have our hunting and fishing regulations that are translated into not just the Hmong language, but we also have it in Karen and Somali and Spanish as well. We are engaging at community events. We're trying to build more programming here that are specific to helping support the Southeast Asian and the Hmong community. And there's going to be a lot more like digital engagement and other, just one form of engagement. But we're excited to really continue and expand on this work. So with that said, this is just one story of how one community really deeply connects to hunting and the outdoors, and some of which is pretty similar. It's probably similar to your own community or your own hunting traditions. But we're all here, right? Because we are in some way or another deeply connected to either hunting or the outdoors. So whether that is us being here because the love of the cute puppies and hunting dogs, or maybe it's just a tradition that you do with your family from year to year, whether it's that time with community and family, whether it's your passion for conserving the natural world, or maybe it's just you just enjoy that solitude, right? But one thing that we do all have in common here is that we have that deep connection to nature and the outdoors, and that's something that we want to continue to pass on into the future. So, with that said, I would actually like to end this by just challenging each and every one of you out there to just think about your own hunting relation to, or your own experience. So, either your relation to the outdoors or the reason why you continue to hunt or do that outdoor skills. And I want you to think about what it is that you want to pass on to future generations. Which thank you for joining me today.
Hey, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing, I mean, the history and the passion that you have and your community has for the outdoors in Minnesota. It's obviously an important part of everything we do as a DNR. So if anybody does have any questions for me, please put them in the Q&A section. It's in the Slido again, bottom right-hand corner, and those three little dots there. If you open that up and see Slido there, you can put any questions in there. May, you said you were able to attend your first deer hunt this year. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Like, did you guys hunt? Did your family go hunt public land? Were deer harvested? And how were they shared?
Yeah, so not this year, just through our program here, one of our Learn to Hunt programs here. But again, that experience was, yeah, it kind of made me feel like, oh, I have been missing out all these years. Like I've always been around when my family was like prepping, things like that, but it's always been I went on all of the fishing trips, just not the hunting ones.
Great. I think and through our learnhunting.org platform that we just launched at the DNR2, that social support for just getting out there, it's much easier to get out hunting or doing stuff with friends and family than it is just to get yourself out of bed at super early in the morning, just go out by yourself. So it's having that social support there is always nice. So
Yeah, or that mentor that's really excited
yep.
to just share that with you. So the more excited your mentor is, the more exciting the experience is for you.
Yeah, looks like we had one question. I think you just brought it up too. Is there any programs that teach hunting and fishing and etiquette for hunting and fishing to hunters? in general. I think you just brought up our Learn to Hunt program. If you want to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so and Benji, you can add on to it too. But we do have the Learn to Hunt program. And then not just that, but again, this like intro to like fishing and things like that as well. So those are all kind of like programs that we would like to kind of expand and build out more on here specifically with the outreach staff. But there's so many opportunities. There's, obviously the Learn to Hunt one. And then there's also, for example, sometimes if there's a community event, like we've gone out to do like some intro to fishing programs, whether that's like ice fishing or, just casting out in open water. There's, obviously we also have the boat program as well, the Becoming an Outdoors Woman, and that's definitely like introductory, getting women out there. We have lots of folks on our outreach team that you all can reach out to if you want more information.
Yeah, so feel free to reach out to myself or me, and we can connect you with people that could help with that stuff too. We do try to do a good job and a good variety of hunting programs and on the Learn to level across the state. So Eric Reed had a question and a comment in here. Outstanding presentation. Thank you. Do you have any advice for folks that have not included women in their hunting camps and are interested in being more inclusive?
So kind of coming from that audience myself, again, I do think that there is a really important piece about having like a woman's hunt or having a woman's intro activity. And again, you could definitely reach out to us. We can connect you to our bow coordinator. But I think my biggest suggestion would be again, it's really important to build that space. And so if you build that space, and that's exactly what like women are looking for, that will provide that for that learning experience.
That's great. I was able to attend Pheasant Fest this weekend also and went to the Women on the Wings brunch that they had, and it was really great to see all the women in that room that have this, passion, and they're out there pheasant hunting. They're influencers, they're writers, they're magazine people, um, really just spreading that passion and welcoming to women in the outdoors, which is really great. So, uh, David had a question. What is the trend in Hmong hunting and fishing activities over time?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, obviously, I think I would have to say personally that, if you meet a Hmong community member and you ask them, do you hunt or fish? Most likely they either hunt or fish or both. Again, it's just like deeply rooted within our culture. I would say that the evolution or the change throughout, like, from the 1970s to now is that a lot of the times, because traditionally it was a form of providing like food, that was in the early days, that was something that that was seen, even like here in the US, is to kind of provide food, right? But as our community learned that it's, a little bit different with rules and regulation, and you can't just go, out there and hunt for like, above the limit. And so that meant that you only were able to source out a certain amount of this food source. And so now the generations have changed, mindsets have changed and evolved, and so the younger folks have a deeper connection. Not to say that the older generation doesn't have a connection to conservation, but the conservation mindset has changed a little bit. So a lot of folks now are the younger generations, are all about a lot of like the catch and release type of things when it comes to like hunting, but also like, just not like harvesting to harvest for food, but it's for the conservation aspect of it. It's for the enjoyment. And then a lot of people are doing it more on like the professional level where it's really about getting that trophy now. And so it's not about like, again, harvesting like as often or as much as you can, but it's more about that professional sport of it and doing it for like the trophy.
Hmm, interesting. Um, Grace asked, I don't know if you have any on hand to share, but what are some Hmong specific ways to prepare wild game or dishes that are cooked with wild game? Oh,
That's
no,
a
your
good
recipe
question.
knowledge.
No, that's a good question. There's so many different ways to cook wild game. I know that in my family, one really common thing to cook deer and venison is in a stew. So that's usually it's like stew with a lot of different herbs. That's one really main big piece. And then even like small game, like with squirrels and stuff like that. A lot of it is a stew or like a soup as well. And then for like hunting and or for like angling. There's so many recipes, but um, I do want to note that a lot of our Hmong culture, because we don't have like a specific like country. So, again, we lived in, Laos and Thailand and Vietnam. So our food and our culture of food is kind of a blend of all three of those different cultures. And so you'll see a lot of our food that's like influenced by like Thai food or Laotian food or Vietnamese food. So I don't have a specific recipe, like all the ingredients, but again, in the Minnesota conservation volunteer articles, there is one, someone shared there's an article, I forget which one it is, but there's an article about, a, fa a family that went out to squirrel hunt, and he actually does share, his squirrel small game hunting recipe there. So I would check that out.
And just from my personal experience, I was doing a Korean firearm safety class, and we took a few of the students out squirrel hunting. And instead of the traditional way I was brought up with small game hunting, is we got the squirrel, we scun it, we gutted it, and we used the meat for stuff. And we got back, we got a couple squirrels, and the moo, instead of skinning it and gutting it, singed the hair off of it, and then brought it home, and they used more of the animal. And he brought some stew, like you said, a squirrel stew in a couple days later, and tried it, and it was a little on the spicy side for my taste, but it was very good. So just that some of the traditions and how to prepare that stuff it's fascinating to me. So let's see if I got one more question here. If I too many clicks here. Um, Franklin asked, how does Hmong immigrant farming relate to affect hunting in Minnesota? Interesting. You said protecting crops is a big part of hunting in Southeast Asia.
Yeah, so I was just referring to that because of us practicing like that hunting technique. So it was a little, or not the hunting technique, the farming technique, the slash and burn. So that was a little ways away from like our homes and our villages. And so that meant that some of that hunting would actually be, that would happen around that area. And so it doesn't have like a direct, other than like protecting that crop, just kind of like how a lot of people here in the US, right? Like if we have a lot of this like farm field and things like that, like some of that, hunting is to control, animals that are around our crops as well. So it's very similar like in Laos, but here in the US now, that isn't, other than if Hmong families own farms themselves, other than that, or like own their own land, like we don't technically, there's not like a direct relation to agriculture here versus in direct relation to hunting here.
Great. I think if anybody has any other questions, please feel free to enter them in the chat there. I think that was all of them we got through, and we made it in time, so that's awesome. So again, May, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and passion and about the Hmong history, Hmong culture in Minnesota. It's really fascinating. I'm glad we have people like you that are out here doing the work, and the people before you that have done so much work to integrate that into our customs here in Minnesota. So
Yeah, thanks for
um,
having me.
you bet. And everybody join us. Our spring announcement should be coming out here in a couple weeks. It's fast approaching March, and we will be diving right in. It's the 75th anniversary of WMAs in Minnesota, or wildlife management areas, and we're going to be talking to Dave Troba about that I believe on the 11th of March. So hopefully we'll see everybody. That announcement again will be coming out here in a week or two, and hopefully you can register for that, and we will see you in March. So thanks everybody. Get outside, enjoy the beautiful weather, and have a safe weekend outdoors.